will be a long piece, so I'll deliver it in full. Here it is. I started walking through Caldwell Park because of my knee. That's the part no one finds interesting, but it matters. In March of last year, I had a minor arthroscopic procedure on my left knee. A cleanup job, nothing dramatic. And my physical therapist told me I needed to walk on varied terrain for at least 40 minutes a day. Not a treadmill, not a track. She wanted uneven ground, gentle inclines, surfaces that would force my stabilizer muscles to re-engage. She actually said that. Re-engage, like my knee had quit its job and needed to be talked back into the office. Caldwell Park was 11 minutes from my apartment by car. It sat in a weird transitional zone between two neighborhoods in the northwest part of the city. On one side, a grid of post-war bungalows with aluminum siding and American flags, and on the other, a stretch of newer townhomes built over what used to be a lumber yard. The park itself was about 60 acres, which sounds large until you walk it and realize a third of that is a drainage field you can't access, and another chunk is taken up by 2 baseball diamonds and a parking lot. But the walking paths were good. They looped through a mix of open grass and mature oak and sweet gum trees, crossed a small creek on a flat wooden bridge, wound past a playground, a covered pavilion with grills, and a fenced-off area near the north end that I initially assumed was a water treatment access point or utility zone. The paths were paved in most places, crushed gravel in others, and there was one long stretch near the eastern edge that was just packed dirt with exposed roots. Exactly what my therapist wanted. I started going every afternoon around 4. The light was good, the park was never crowded at that hour, and the loop I settled into took me about 50 minutes with my pace at the time. I'd park in the southern lot near the baseball fields, walk north along the tree line, cross the creek, curve through the interior loop, past the pavilion, then come back south along the eastern dirt trail, about 2.5 miles. I did this every day for 3 weeks without anything unusual happening. I need to say that clearly, 3 weeks of normal. The park had regulars. There was a woman in her 60s who walked 2 corgis on a tandem leash. A guy about my age, maybe early 30s, who ran the outer perimeter in compression sleeves and never made eye contact. A groundskeeper in a olive green county shirt who was usually emptying trash cans near the pavilion or blowing leaves off the path near the parking lot. A few parents at the playground in the late afternoon. The usual. On the 4th week, a Tuesday, I'm fairly sure, I decided to extend my route. My knee was feeling better, and I wanted to push the walk closer to an hour. The obvious extension was to take the gravel path that branched north past the creek and continued toward the fenced utility area I'd never explored. From the main loop, you could see that the path kept going past the fence and curved into a section of the park I hadn't entered. It looked like more of the same. Trees, grass, a few benches, maybe a maintenance road. Nothing about it was uninviting. It just wasn't part of my route. So I took the branch. The gravel path narrowed slightly past the creek and became more root-crossed, which I liked. The trees thickened a bit. Mostly oaks, a few elms with that distinctive vase shape. And the sounds from the playground faded quickly. Within 2 or 3 minutes of walking, I couldn't hear anything from the main park. Not silence exactly. There were birds and the ambient hum of a neighborhood. A lawn mower somewhere, a dog, the faint Doppler of a car on the road that bordered the park to the west. But the playground, the parking lot, the sounds of people gone. That seemed normal. Sound travels oddly around trees and terrain. I passed the fenced area on my left. Up close, it was clearly a utility access point. A metal hatch in the ground, surrounded by a 4-foot chain-link fence, with a county facilities placard zip-tied to it. Nothing interesting. Past it, the path curved gently to the right and opened into a section I'll call the North Clearing, because I never found a name for it on any map. It was a wide, flat, roughly oval area of mowed grass, maybe 100 yards across, bordered on all sides by trees. There were 3 benches arranged in a loose triangle near the center, a single waste bin, and a dirt footpath that crossed the clearing east to west. The grass was well maintained. The benches were the same green painted steel as the ones in the main park. There was nothing wrong with it. I walked through the clearing, followed the path to the eastern tree line, and looped back the way I came. The whole extension added maybe 15 minutes. I got back to my car and drove home. That was the first day. I went back the next afternoon and took the same extended route. This time I noticed something small that I probably wouldn't have caught if I hadn't been there the day before. The 3 benches in the north clearing were in different positions. Not dramatically. They were still in a rough triangle. But the bench that had been closest to the west tree line was now closer to the center, and the one nearest the waste bin had rotated slightly, maybe 15 degrees, so that it faced more toward the south. The third bench might have moved too, but I wasn't sure enough to commit to it. I stood there for a minute, looking at them. Park benches get moved. Maintenance crews reposition things. Kids drag benches around. I'd seen benches in the main park shift a few feet between visits. It was a nothing observation, and I treated it like one. The next day, they were back where they'd been on Tuesday. All 3. I was sure of it because I'd been paying attention, and the bench near the waste bin was aligned with a visible worn patch in the grass that matched its feet exactly. It hadn't been dragged back. It was just there, in its original spot, as if Wednesday hadn't happened. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't fear. It was a small, dry click of noticing. The feeling you get when a number doesn't add up in a spreadsheet and you haven't figured out why yet, but you know something's off. I kept walking. Over the next week, I took the extended route every day and started paying closer attention. What I found didn't come all at once. It accumulated. The waste bin in the clearing was a standard park bin. Green steel, open top, black, plastic liner. On Thursday, the liner was about a third full of typical debris. A Gatorade bottle, some napkins, a plastic bag. On Friday it was empty, not emptied. Empty, no liner. The bin was bare inside, clean steel with a faint patina of rust at the bottom. On Saturday the liner was back, and it contained exactly the same items in what I'm fairly sure was the same arrangement. The Gatorade bottle was wedged at the same angle against the left wall of the bin. I reached in and pulled the bottle out. It was dry. The cap was on. There was about an inch of blue liquid in the bottom. I set it on the bench nearby and kept walking. When I came back through the clearing on my return loop, maybe 20 minutes later, the bottle was back in the bin. I checked. Same bottle. Same blue liquid. Same angle. That was the first time I felt something cold move through me. And I mean that literally. Not a metaphor. A physical chill that started in my hands and went up through my forearms and into my chest. I left the park faster than usual that day. But I came back. Of course I came back. I want to explain why, because from the outside it sounds irrational, and maybe it was, but here's what I was actually thinking. I was curious, and I was not yet afraid in a way that overrode curiosity. The bench positions, the trash bin. These were strange, but they were small. They were the kind of thing you could still file under "I must be wrong" or "there's an explanation." I was a man with a recovering knee who walked through a park every day. I wasn't in danger. Nothing had threatened me. The clearing was an open, well-maintained daylight space in a public park in a safe neighborhood. I felt like I was noticing something, not encountering something. There's a difference. At least there was then. The following Monday, I brought a notebook. I know how that sounds, but I'm an engineer. I work in HVAC system design. When something doesn't make sense, I measure it. I sat on the bench nearest the east tree line and sketched the clearing. Approximate dimensions, bench positions, the waste bin, the paths, the tree line, notable trees. I noted the time. 4:22 p.m. The weather. Overcast, about 58 degrees. And the ambient sounds. Birds, a distant leaf blower, nothing else. I walked the clearing slowly, pacing off distances. The east-west footpath was about 110 paces across. The north-south axis of the clearing was slightly shorter, maybe 95 paces. The 3 benches formed a triangle with roughly 30 to 40 feet between each pair. I wrote it all down. I photographed the clearing with my phone from 4 angles. Then I left, completed my loop, and went home. Tuesday, I returned with the notebook and measured everything again. The clearing was 7 paces longer on the east-west axis. I counted 3 times to be sure. 117 paces, not 110. The north-south axis was the same. The bench triangle had changed shape. The 2 southern benches were closer together, and the northern bench was farther from both. The waste bin had not moved, but it now had a second bin next to it, identical in design, positioned about 4 feet to the right. There had not been a second bin the day before. I had photographs to prove it. I looked at the photo on my phone from Monday. 1 bin. I looked up. 2 bins. I photographed the 2 bins, checked the image immediately, and there they were on my screen. 2 bins. I walked to the new bin and touched it. Solid steel, bolted to a short concrete pad in the ground. The concrete was weathered, stained, set flush with the surrounding grass. It looked like it had been there for years. This is the part where the cold feeling came back, and this time it didn't leave. I sat on the nearest bench for a long time. I don't know how long because, and this is important, when I finally checked my phone, it was 4:12 p.m. I had entered the park at 4:05 and walked directly to the clearing, which takes a minimum of 12 minutes. My phone should have read at least 4:17, probably 4:20 or later, but it read 4:12, and the timestamp on my most recent photo, the 2 bins, read 4:08. I had not taken that photo at 4:08. At 4:08 I was still on the main path, nowhere near the clearing. I was certain of this because I'd checked the time at the trailhead. I left. I walked back to the parking lot at a pace that was not quite running, and I sat in my car and looked at my phone. The time now read 4:47, which felt approximately right. The photo was still timestamped 4:08. The photo still showed 2 bins. I went home and did not go back for 3 days. During those 3 days, I did 2 things. First, I looked at satellite imagery of Caldwell Park on Google Maps. The north clearing was visible. A pale green oval north of the tree line, right where it should be. I could see the paths. I could see what appeared to be a single dark dot near the center that might have been a waste bin. I could not see benches, but that's normal. They'd be too small to resolve clearly. The image was dated from the previous summer, according to the metadata. Second, I searched for anything unusual about the park. News articles, Reddit posts, local history, anything. I found nothing. Caldwell Park was a completely ordinary municipal park. It had been established in 1974 on land donated by a family estate. There had been a small expansion in 2003 when the city acquired an adjacent parcel. The north section, my clearing, appeared to be part of that expansion. The only notable event in the park's history was a small brush fire in 2019, quickly contained, which had damaged some fencing on the west side. Nothing strange, nothing rumored, nothing. On Friday, I went back. I went back because the 3 days away had done what distance always does. It had made the strangeness feel exaggerated in memory. Sitting in my apartment, I could almost convince myself I'd miscounted paces, misread timestamps, confused one visit with another. The second waste bin probably had always been there and I'd simply overlooked it. The bench positions were approximate. I hadn't used a tape measure. The timestamps. Phones glitch sometimes. I was building a scaffolding of rational explanations, and it was holding, barely, and I wanted to go back and confirm that the scaffolding was sound. I wanted to walk through the clearing and find it completely normal and feel slightly embarrassed and go on with my knee rehabilitation. I entered the park at 4 p.m. exactly. I noted the time. I walked the main path north, crossed the creek, past the utility fence, and followed the gravel path into the north section. At the point where the trees thicken and the playground sounds disappear, I noted the time again. 4:11. I emerged into the clearing at what should have been approximately 4:13 or 4:14. I did not check my phone at that moment. I was looking at the clearing. There was one bench, not three. One. It was positioned at the exact center of the clearing, facing south. There was one waste bin, in the same spot as always, with a black liner that was empty. The east-west footpath was there. The tree lines were there. The grass was mowed. Everything was clean, maintained, and still. The light was flat and gray. The sky had been overcast all day. And there was no wind. I stood at the edge of the tree line for probably 2 minutes without moving. I was listening. There were no birds. I want to be specific. There had always been birds. Every visit, without exception, I'd heard birds in the clearing. Mostly sparrows and the occasional jay. That Friday, nothing. No birds, no leaf blower, no lawn mower, no dog, no car. The air was absolutely still, and the only sound was my own breathing. I walked into the clearing. The grass felt the same under my shoes. The single bench looked real and solid. I touched it as I passed. Cold steel, flaking paint, a small carved graffiti on the backrest that read J+M inside a rough heart. I had not noticed that graffiti before, but I also hadn't been looking closely at every bench. I walked to the center of the clearing and turned in a full circle. Trees on all sides, gray sky. One bench, one bin, 2 paths, everything geometrically plausible. I pulled out my notebook and paced the east-west axis. 110 paces. Exactly what I'd measured the first time. I paced the north-south axis. 95 paces. Correct. I felt a small, cautious relief. The clearing was back to its original configuration, minus 2 benches. Maybe someone had removed them for maintenance. Maybe the others had been temporarily placed and then taken away. The waste bin count was back to 1. Everything was measurable and consistent. Then I turned around and walked back toward the south tree line to leave. The path wasn't there. I need to be very clear. The gravel path I had entered, from the one that connected the clearing to the main park loop, the one I had walked dozens of times, the one I had walked literally 5 minutes earlier, was not there. The south tree line was an unbroken wall of oaks and elms. No gap, no trail, no gravel. Just trees, trunks spaced 3 or 4 feet apart, underbrush between them, going back as far as I could see into the woods. I walked to the tree line and looked for the path. I walked east along the tree line for 30 or 40 yards. I walked west. There was no opening. The trees looked old and established. There was no sign that a path had ever been cut through them. I checked my phone. 4:14 p.m., the same time I should have arrived. No minutes had passed. I had been in the clearing for at least 10 minutes. Walking, pacing, touching the bench, turning in circles. And my phone still read 4:14. The cold was back, and it was different now. It was in my legs. I made myself think. I was in an open clearing in a public park on a Friday afternoon. The clearing had other exits. The east-west footpath crossed it and entered the trees on both sides. I could take one of those and I could walk through the woods in any direction and eventually hit a road or a fence or the main park. 60 acres is not a wilderness. I was not lost. I was confused, and something was wrong with the space or with my perception of it, but I was not lost. I chose the east path. It was packed dirt, same as I remembered. I followed it into the trees. The canopy closed over me and the light dropped, but it was still clearly daytime. The path was easy to follow. I walked for about 3 minutes and the trees opened up, and I was in the clearing again. I was standing at the western tree line, facing east, as though I had come from the west. The single bench was ahead of me, and to the right. The waste bin was in its place. The clearing looked identical. I had walked east and arrived from the west. I stood there, and I think for about 30 seconds I simply did not think anything. My mind was a flat, white surface. Then training kicked in. Not any kind of survival training, just the engineering habit of refusing to accept a result without testing it again. I turned around, re-entered the western tree line on the path I had apparently just come from, and walked. 3 minutes of packed dirt under intermittent canopy. The trees opened, and I stepped into the clearing from the east side, as if I had come from the east. The bench, the bin, the grass. So the path was a loop. Both directions led back to the clearing. The south entrance was gone. I hadn't tried going north yet. There was no visible north path. The northern tree line had no gap, same as the south, but I could walk into the trees directly. There was no fence, no barrier, just the natural spacing of trunks and the undergrowth between them. I stepped off the grass and into the tree line, pushing through some low scrub, ducking under a branch. The ground was soft, slightly damp. I kept going north, walking as straight as I could. After maybe 4 or 5 minutes, the trees thinned, and light opened up ahead of me, and I stepped out into a mowed clearing with one bench and one waste bin. I checked my phone. 4:14. That was the moment I understood that the clearing was not simply strange. It was closed. Whatever this space was, once you entered it, the paths led back to it. Walking through the trees led back to it. And time was not passing while I was inside. I want to describe what fear feels like at this stage, because it's not what you'd think. I wasn't screaming or panicking. I was standing in a well-maintained park, clearing on a gray afternoon, and I was terrified in a way that expressed itself as extreme, almost painful clarity. Every blade of grass was distinct. The grain of the bench's wood armrest was hyper-real. I could feel each individual tooth in my mouth. My body was preparing for something, dumping everything it had into my senses, and there was nothing to fight or flee from. Just grass and trees and a bench. I sat down on the bench. I needed to think, and I needed to not waste energy walking in circles. Here's what I had. The clearing resets. Exits loop back. Time is fixed. Or at least my phone thinks it is. The clearing's physical dimensions are consistent when measured within a single visit, but vary between visits. Objects. Benches, bins appear and disappear between visits, but within a single visit. The configuration is stable. The clearing is always well maintained. The clearing is always empty of people. That last point hit me suddenly. I had never seen another person in the north clearing, not once in over a month of visits. The main park had regulars, joggers, dog walkers, the groundskeeper. The north clearing had no one, ever. I sat on the bench and reviewed what I knew, and then I considered what had changed between my normal visits and this visit. On every previous occasion, I had walked into the clearing from the south path and walked out the south path. The path had always been there when I left. The clearing had always let me go. Today I had done something different. I had stopped in the center. I had paced back and forth, measuring. I had spent time. On my other visits, the normal ones, the ones where I got out fine, I had always kept walking. I entered from the south, crossed the clearing, and exited either to the east or back the way I came without lingering. Today I'd lingered. I'd stayed. And the exit had closed. It was a theory. I had no way to test it without an exit to test it on, and the south exit was gone. But I noted it. I stood up and walked to the east path again. Before entering the trees, I made a mark. I dragged my heel across the dirt at the edge of the path, leaving a visible line. Then I walked. 3 minutes of trees. The clearing opened ahead of me. I stepped out on the west side and immediately walked to the east path entrance. My heel mark was there. Same line in the same dirt. So the path really was looping, east entrance to west entrance, and the marks I left persisted. The clearing was the same instance of itself each time, not a copy. I made another mark near the west entrance and walked the path again. Arrived east, both marks present. I was not being transported to a duplicate. I was literally, physically looping through the same space. I need to tell you what I tried next, because I think it's the thing that saved me. I left the path. About halfway along the east to west tree-covered stretch, I stopped and stepped off the packed dirt into the underbrush to my left, which should have been roughly south. I pushed through scrub, stepped over a fallen branch, and kept going. The ground sloped very gently downward. The trees were dense but passable. I walked for what I counted as 200 steps, then 300, then 500. The trees did not thin. The light did not change. I did not arrive anywhere. I stopped and looked behind me, and I could not see the path. I was in undifferentiated forest. Every direction looked the same. I felt the fear spike, a sharp, bright flare of it, and I controlled it by doing what I do with engineering problems. I reduced the variables. I turned around exactly 180 degrees, using a fixed tree as a reference point, and I walked back. I counted steps. At around 480 steps, I hit the packed dirt path. I had drifted slightly, but I found it. I was between the clearing and wherever the path loops, and I chose to return to the clearing, because at least the clearing was a known space. I stepped back out into the grass. The bench, the bin, the sky. 4:14 p.m. Here is what I did next, and I need you to understand that I did this calmly, because the alternative was to do it in a panic, and panic was not going to solve the geometry of an impossible park. I walked to the exact center of the clearing. I stood where I had stood when I first paced off the dimensions. I closed my eyes, not for any mystical reason, but because I wanted to focus on what I could remember, rather than what I could see. I reconstructed my normal route, south entrance, crossed the clearing on a gentle diagonal toward the northeast, reached the east path, and continue. That was my typical transit. I always entered from the south and angled northeast. I always kept moving. I never stopped in the center. I never measured. I never stayed. I opened my eyes and looked toward the south tree line. Still unbroken. No path. But I hadn't been trying to find the south path by looking at it. I had been trying to find it by walking. Every time I'd walked a path in this clearing, the path had delivered me somewhere. The wrong somewhere. Looped and folded. But somewhere. I hadn't tried to walk toward the south entrance. I'd tried to walk through the east path, through the trees, through the north. I hadn't retraced the exact route I always took. I walked from the center of the clearing, toward the south tree line at the same angle I normally used when approaching from the south. Not straight south, but on the southwest to northeast diagonal, reversed. I aimed for the spot where the path should be, based on my memory of entering. 8 steps from the tree line, I saw it. A gap. The path. It was just there, between 2 oaks, exactly where it had always been. Gravel, slightly overgrown at the edges, leading south into the trees toward the creek and the main park. I had been looking at this section of tree line from the bench. I had walked along it. The gap had not been there. It was there now, because I was approaching from the right angle, at the right trajectory, in motion. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I walked into the path, and I kept walking. I heard the gravel under my shoes. I felt branches brush my arms. The light shifted, got slightly brighter, and the sounds came back. A bird, then another, then the distant barking of a dog and the hum of tires on asphalt. I crossed the creek bridge. I passed the utility fence. I reached the main loop and turned south toward the parking lot. I passed the woman with the corgis. She didn't look at me. I got in my car. The dashboard clock read 5:38 p.m. My phone still read 4 or 14. I drove home. In my apartment, I sat on the couch and stared at the wall for a while. My phone eventually updated. It synced with the network and jumped to the correct time, 6:05 p.m. The photos I'd taken in the clearing retained their 4:08 and 4:14 timestamps. They showed a clearing with 1 bench and 1 bin. They looked completely ordinary. I did not go back to Caldwell Park. I want to say that cleanly. I stopped going. I found another park for my knee exercises, a smaller one closer to my apartment with no interesting features and a paved half-mile loop and a parking lot full of minivans. My knee healed. I returned to my normal life. The experience at Caldwell receded into the back of my awareness, not forgotten but shelved, the way you shelve something you can't explain and don't want to keep examining. 3 months later, in August, I ran into the groundskeeper. Not at the park, at a hardware store, a big one near the highway. I recognized his face. Weathered, mid-50s, the deep tan of someone who works outside, and his olive shirt with the county park's logo, though he was off-duty. Wearing jeans and a regular t-shirt under an open flannel, I recognized him and almost didn't say anything, but he was in the aisle next to me, looking at PVC fittings, and something made me speak. I said I used to walk at Caldwell Park and asked if he still worked there. He said he did. I said the park was in good shape, that I'd always appreciated how well the paths were maintained. He thanked me. There was a pause, and then, because I couldn't stop myself, I asked about the north clearing. His expression didn't change dramatically. He didn't go pale or look frightened, but he set down the fitting he was holding and gave me a particular kind of look. Assessing, careful, the way someone looks at you when they're deciding how much to say. He asked what I meant. I said I'd walked through the north section a few times and found the clearing up there and thought it was a nice spot. I kept it casual. I didn't mention anything impossible. He said, most people don't go up that far. I said I'd extended my route for the exercise. He nodded slowly, and then said something that I've replayed in my mind many times since. He said, that section used to be part of a different property, before the city bought it. The family that owned it had some conditions on the transfer. We're supposed to mow it and keep the bins and benches, but we're not really supposed to encourage foot traffic. I asked what kind of conditions. He said he didn't know the specifics. He said the Parks Department just had a note in the file that said the north section was to be maintained but not developed, and that signage and amenities should be minimal and non-directional. He said those were the exact words, non-directional. I asked if he'd ever been up there himself. He picked the PVC fitting back up and looked at it instead of me. He said, I mow it every 2 weeks. I go in and I come straight back out. I don't stop in there. He didn't say anything else about it. We talked about PVC for a minute, and then I left. In the parking lot, sitting in my car, I pulled up the county property records on my phone and searched for the parcel history of Caldwell Park, the 2003 expansion. The north section had been transferred from a private estate. The family name was Renard. The transfer included a deed restriction, but the text of the restriction was not available in the public database. Just a note that one existed. I searched for the Renard family. I found very little. A few property records in the county going back to the 1940s, a mention in a local historical society newsletter from 2001 about the Renard parcel being considered for acquisition, and a single obituary from 1998 for a woman named Colette Renard, aged 91, who had lived on the property for most of her life and was survived by no immediate family. The obituary described her as a private person who had maintained the land herself for decades after her husband's death. It mentioned that the property included extensive grounds that Colette had kept in meticulous condition, according to neighbors. A 91-year-old woman maintaining 60 acres of grounds by herself. That detail sat wrong with me, though I couldn't say exactly why. People exaggerate in obituaries. I let it go. I didn't research further. I didn't go back to Caldwell. I moved on with my life, and the months passed, and the whole thing became a story I didn't tell anyone, because there was no version of it that didn't make me sound unwell. Then in November, I was going through photos on my phone and came across the pictures I'd taken in the clearing. I'd forgotten about them. I opened the first one, the 4 angles set from my Monday measurement visit, and looked at it. A clearing, slightly overcast, green grass, a bench, a waste bin, trees. Normal. I swiped to the next one. Same clearing, different angle. Normal. Next. Normal. The 4th photo, taken from the east tree line facing west, stopped me. In the background, at the far edge of the clearing where the western trees began, there was a figure. A person, standing just inside the tree line, barely visible in the shadow. I zoomed in. The resolution wasn't great at that distance, but I could make out a shape. Upright, human-sized, slightly stooped, wearing something dark. It could have been a person. It could have been a shadow on a trunk. I looked at the timestamp. 4:22 p.m., the same day as the other 3 photos. I had taken all 4 photos within a span of 2 or 3 minutes, turning in place. The other 3 photos, aimed north, south, and east, showed no figure. Only the west-facing shot showed it, and only at the far edge. I had been alone in the clearing that day. I was certain. I had looked in every direction. No one was there. I put my phone down and didn't pick it up again for an hour. Here is what I believe, based on everything I experienced and everything I've been able to piece together. I want to be careful here because I don't have a full explanation, and I'm not going to invent one. I'm going to tell you only what I think is supported. The North Clearing at Caldwell Park is a space that behaves differently than the space around it. Its physical dimensions are not fixed between visits. Objects within it appear and disappear on a schedule or logic I don't understand. Time inside the clearing does not advance normally, or at minimum, devices inside it fail to track time correctly. The paths that exit the clearing loop back into it unless you traverse them on the same trajectory you used to enter. If you stop inside the clearing. If you linger, measure, treat it as a place to be in rather than a place to move through. It closes. The exits fold. You are inside it, and the clearing is all there is, and the paths are loops, and the trees are a wall. The way out is the way in, the same direction, the same angle, the same behavior as arrival, crossing through, not staying. You have to leave the way you came, and you have to be in transit, not at rest. The groundskeeper knew this. He mows and comes straight back out. He doesn't stop. The Renard family knew it too. They maintained it for decades. They mowed the grass and placed benches and kept the bins and did everything you do to maintain a park. But they didn't develop it. They didn't build in it. They didn't direct anyone to it. Non-directional. They kept it looking normal, because maybe. And this is the part I'm least sure of. It needs to look normal. Maybe the maintenance isn't for visitors. Maybe it's for the clearing itself. That's speculation. I'll stop there. One last thing. In December, 4 months after I stopped going to Caldwell, I was on a bus that took a road along the road bordering the park's west side. I wasn't thinking about the park. I was reading something on my phone. The bus slowed at a stop, and I glanced out the window, and I could see over the park's low perimeter fence, across the baseball diamonds, past the tree line, and into the far distance where the north section would be. I couldn't see the clearing from that angle and distance. It was too far and the trees were in the way, but at the very edge of what I could make out, right where the north tree line should begin, I saw something that made me press my face against the glass. There were more benches. Not 3, not 1. I counted at least 8, arranged in a rough line at the edge of the trees, all facing south, toward the main park. They were green steel, identical, evenly spaced, like an audience. The bus pulled away from the stop, and the angle changed, and the trees blocked my view. I never saw them again. I take a different bus now.